Well, hi everyone. Welcome to GIS Day. Thank you so much for tuning in here. So I will be giving a talk about a career in GIS. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my story and how I got into GIS, and I'm excited to tell you about that today. And then we'll wrap it up with some applications of real-world applications of GIS and how I've used GIS throughout my career, and then some examples of how I'm working with customers now, helping them utilize GIS and get the most out of it. So, all right, let me see here so I can make sure I've got my controls ready to go. All right, so my name is Laura Chapa, and I am a solution engineer out of Esri's San Antonio regional office. So I'm actually geographically located between Austin and San Antonio, just so you can have an idea of where I am on the map. And let's just kick it off here. So I'm going to show you all several maps today because I thought that was rather appropriate. All right, so I'm showing you a really simple map here, but basically what I want to point out is, if you'll notice my point on the map over here in East Texas, so that's actually where I grew up. I was born and raised over in East Texas, and then I came to Texas State University, so I've got that pointed on the map too, right around in the center of Texas. And I came to Texas State at first I was actually studying athletic training when I came to Texas State, and then I realized that maybe that wasn't the best fit for me. But to go back a little bit, before that, even before I left my hometown and came to Texas State University, I played this computer game a lot when I was younger. So my sisters and I would play The Sims, if y'all recall that. I think it's still around, but it was really big when I was in school. And so we would play The Sims on a computer, and we would take turns so we wouldn't get into fights. And what I really loved about playing that game, though, is I really liked the spatial component of it. I loved being able to build houses and really create these layouts on my Sims plot. And even my mom was like, Laura, you know, you really are pretty good at this, so maybe you should consider architecture. And so I remember my senior year of high school, I took a CAD class, which is architecture software, engineering type software. And I really didn't like the software. It was really bland, and I just didn't chime with it. So I ended up switching out from a different class to a different class, and didn't follow through with the CAD class. And even to go backwards a little bit before that too, as I was growing up, anytime we went on a little road trip with my family, my mom had trained me very well to use a map. Nowadays, we have maps on our phones and it's all digital, but back in those days, we had paper maps. And so my mom taught me really how to read the map and be her navigator before we had navigation systems on our phones or in cars. So my map reading ability goes back pretty far, and I've always been fascinated by maps. So it's interesting that I've kind of made it full circle in my career, finding my way back to maps in this way. So let's move on, though. So I came from East Texas, had a background in maps. I was interested in getting into some sort of spatial software, but GIS had not been introduced to me yet. So while I was at Texas State University, I actually studied botany in my undergraduate degree, and I'm really grateful for having had that opportunity to get to study plants more deeply. But there was the big question of, well, what am I going to do after college with a botany degree? And I was really fortunate that once I graduated with my 4-year degree, I was able to get a job at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, which is a research department at Texas State University, where they perform environmental research related to water resources. So now you should be seeing a map of the Rio Grande Basin, which is a watershed. So this is one of my the first big projects was working on a biogeographical analysis of the Rio Grande watershed from the headwaters, which actually starts up in southern Colorado, and the river works its way all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, which I just think is really incredible. And so I was putting together all of this information that other scientists had put together on the biology and geography of this watershed and compiling it into one document. And how GIS really all got started for me was that I was working on this document and I wanted to include maps in this research document that I was putting together. And there were several maps that I had put into this document, but they were all pulled from other sources. They were all in different formats, all in different fonts, all in different color schemes. And I wanted to recreate all of these maps so that they all matched, so that throughout the document there was a uniformity with the way they looked. So I started asking. At the time, I was fortunate that one of my good friends and I worked together at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, and she had actually studied GIS. Now, at this point in time, I had not taken any GIS classes in college, and so I started asking her, like, hey, can you show me how to use this software and how to make a map? And this is what you're looking at is actually one of the first maps that I ever made, which I think is pretty neat. And so you can actually see it's really small, but I made this in June of 2011, but which I think I'd made maps before that. But most of my first maps were all in the Rio Grande Watershed. So that's where it all started for me, was making maps of this first job, and I really liked the software. So at that point in time, I was using ArcGIS, so Esri software, and I just really had a knack for it. It was challenging, but not too challenging where I was deterred from using it, and I was just determined to figure it out. And so I really started teaching myself and asking my coworkers, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? Looking on the internet, trying to find information, and then just a lot of trial and error. And so after about 6 months of working at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, I realized, well, you know, maybe college wasn't so bad, and I thought about going back to school to get my master's degree. So I did start my master's degree in Interdisciplinary Studies of Sustainability, which I know is a mouthful, but basically it essentially was, you know, I did a lot of environmental science. I took a lot of like environmental science sort of classes. So I took classes on water resources, conservation biology. I studied ethics so that I could be an ethical scientist, and putting all of that together, because I realized during my first job at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment that environmental issues, you can't just address an environmental issue from one discipline. You can't just know the biology and come up with a solution. You have to understand the economics. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand if there are any religious components of the population there. You have to understand the chemistry and take into account all of these disciplines and put them together to come up with real solutions that are going to work and that are going to last. So that's what inspired me to go back to school to study other disciplines so that I could start piecing this puzzle together and come up with real solutions that were going to work. And so while I was in grad school, I ended up working with drones, which is pretty cool. I didn't get to fly the drone, so that's unfortunate, but I did get to go out with a team that flew my study area. So you can see on this map on the left-hand side, this is a map of the Matador Wildlife Management Area, and those long paths, which I don't know if y'all can see. I don't think y'all can see my cursor. Maybe you can on the map here. But these are flight paths here in these different colors. Hold on just a second, folks. Give me just a moment here. I apologize about that. All right, so we've got these different flight paths. So those are the flight paths that the drone flew. And the goal of this project for my master's thesis was to be able to identify salt cedar, which is a non-native invasive plant that exists in the southwest of the United States. It was brought over from Russia about 200 years ago, but it basically takes over the landscape in areas that it finds that it fits really well because it is an aggressive plant. But then the roots also exude salt, which make the soil around the plants salty, which thus makes it really hard for native plants that aren't used to that salty soil to continue to exist there. So what ends up happening is the salt cedar takes over. So at the Matador Wildlife Management Area, they were trying to use drones to identify, is this a way that could we use drones to be able to map salt cedar throughout this wildlife management area? So then once they had a map of where all the salt cedar was, they could go out and start eradicating it. So that's what my master's thesis was. And here on the right-hand side, we're looking at one flight path that was used. And if I zoom into this little area here, look at a little subset is what we're viewing here. The red the red little dots on the map are actually where the salt cedar existed. So then I could, at the end of my research, I was able to provide them with this map, and then they could go out and start getting rid of it. Okay, and then I saw someone put in the chat, we can see your cursor. Okay, thank you, awesome. All right, moving on. So my research for my master's was actually funded by Texas Parks and Wildlife, and it worked out really well because as my work was, the grant funding that I had received at the Meadows Center for Wildlife Environment had ended, I was getting close to graduation and looking for a new job, and so I was able to land an internship with the landscape ecology program at Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so then I got to work on a team that was actually mapping the vegetation for the entire state of Texas. So when I first started my botany degree, I had no idea that it was going to go in this direction, and I was going to end up using technology in this way and getting into making maps and mapping vegetation. And so it's really exciting to see, you know, and also review how my career evolved in this direction. And so I got to work on a team with a couple of other botanists. I got to go do field work, and I'm just really grateful that I got to be a part of this legacy data that will continue to exist in Texas for quite some time. So here we are looking at a map of the vegetation for the entire state of Texas. Now, when I say mapping the vegetation, I don't mean individual plants, but instead we were mapping essentially ecosystems. So ecosystems would be systems of plants or these systems of ecology where the soils are similar, the geography is similar, the climate is similar, the plants that exist there are similar. And so all of those different factors make an ecosystem. And so here we are looking at all these different colors, each individual color. There's about 398 unique vegetation types or ecosystem types in this mapping data set. And so I didn't get to travel all over the state to collect data, but I did get to travel over some parts of the state to collect data. And then from this vegetation data set, because vegetation is the foundation for all types of habitats that animals use. So from this vegetation map that we had created, we were then able to do derivative projects for mapping habitat for other species. So animal species, birds and reptiles and mammals and so on. And so that was really neat too, to get to be able to help animals in that way, because I've always been a biologist at heart ever since I was a child. And it was great to be able to do something at a larger scale and be able to apply all the skills that I had acquired. And then also further develop my skills, especially when it came to GIS. So I was with Texas Parks and Wildlife for 5.5 years. And during that time, while I was still with Texas Parks and Wildlife, I was hired on to Austin Community College, where I worked part-time. And in 2018, I was hired on to Austin Community College in the Environmental Science Department. So I started out teaching Introduction to Environmental Science, and I still teach that actually till today. And then about almost 2 years ago now, I was hired on to the Austin Community College GIS department. So I'm employed by 2 departments over there at Austin Community College, which is just an amazing college. If you're looking for a great community college experience, I highly recommend ACC. And so I've been teaching at ACC, like I said, for almost 2 years now, teaching different courses in GIS there, Intro to GIS. I'm teaching advanced topics in GIS now, and then next semester I'll be teaching a different class in GIS. So ultimately, I really enjoy teaching, and I like helping students kind of figure out their path, and also teaching students the skills that they need to move forward. Because when I was studying botany and biology, no one told me about GIS until I'd already graduated, which was a really important skill that I needed, but I had no idea about it until later on. And luckily I did find myself at a job that was really open to allowing me to learn GIS on the job. But I want to help make sure that students that are trying to figure that out in their career path figure that out earlier rather than later, like I did. All right, so next we're going to look at some different maps here. So these are some maps that I created during my time at Texas Parks and Wildlife. So, maps, a great map doesn't have to be very complicated. A good map is actually best if it's simple, to be honest. And you really want to get the point across of what type of data you're showing, and the simpler often is the better. So what we're looking at here is a map of, this was a map that someone had reached out to me while I was at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they just needed a map of showing, this is Mother Neff State Park, this red boundary here. You can see that red boundary. So we call that a polygon in GIS. And so we have this shape in here. So that's the Mother Neff State Park boundary. And they just simply needed to know, hey, what is my state boundary relative to the floodplain? And here, this turquoise blue that we're seeing on the screen, this is the floodplain. And so just being able to put a map together for this, and this just took me a few minutes to be able to put this together for them, but this was so useful for them. So something as simple as that can be so powerful. Another map that I put together, so this is a fun one. I randomly got a phone call one day when I was at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we got to talking about different projects, and then this individual that had called me was on this water quality program permit review team. So I know that's also a mouthful, but basically they are tasked with, whenever someone files for a permit with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality with the state of Texas, and let's say they want to discharge some waste into a river body. And then the Texas Parks and Wildlife Water Quality Program will then review that permit to see how it may, what is going to be released, what's going to be discharged, and how is that going to impact the local plants and animals. So as this woman and I were talking on the phone, she was explaining that, you know, well, when we go out in the field and we're getting ready to go out in the field, we have to map all of we need to figure out where all these different things are, like where are the local TPWD offices? So then they would have to go to Google and they'd be Googling, where's the, you know, closest Texas Parks and Wildlife office, or where is the aquifer zone relative to where I'm going to be going to collect field data, or which ecoregion do I fall in, or which county am I in? And they were individually Googling each one of these things. And I said, hey, would it be helpful if you had all of that in one map? And they said, yeah, that would be so helpful. So then I said, okay, well, let me put something together for you. But I took it a step further, because I didn't want to just make them a map. I wanted to teach them how to make the map, so that way they could take this map further and maintain it themselves, because as there was more information they wanted to include in this map, or maybe as things changed, they could have the power to change that themselves and not have to rely on me to do that. And so that's what we did. And they were so grateful. And I really think that it was the beginning of many, many things to come for their program and what they were able to do with making their own maps. All right, another map. So this one was actually created, I made this one for myself. So like I mentioned, I did go to Texas State University. I earned my bachelor's degree and master's degree from Texas State, and decided to stick around. So I'm still in the San Marcos area. So when I was looking to buy a house, I made myself this really simple map to be able to see where the flood zones are, because if y'all are not familiar with the city of San Marcos, and actually the very central part of a very small part around central Texas and Austin to New Braunfels and a little north of Austin, that's actually one of the most flash flood prone regions in all of North America. And so flash floods are very common in this area. And when I was looking to buy a house, I wanted to know where that floodplain was, so that when I was purchasing a home, I could steer clear of the floodplain. Or at least if I knew that I was going to purchase a home near the floodplain, at least I was aware of that. So this was the first thing I did, is I made myself a really simple map with the floodplain. So that's what we're seeing over here. This is the city of San Marcos with some imagery. And then we've got the turquoise blue is one level of a floodplain. And then this red and turquoise stripe, that's the actual like waterway itself. And then there is this orange area that you're seeing throughout the map here, and that is also part of the floodplain, but maybe less likely to flood than the red stripe and the solid turquoise. So again, just another really simple example of how having a map can be really powerful. All right, let's keep going here. So last year in 2020, I was hired on by Esri. So all this time that I've been using Esri software and ArcMap and ArcGIS, ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro, I was hired on by Esri themselves. And so now I work with state and local government in Texas and Louisiana and helping them get the most out of Esri's technology and making sure that they're getting using the software to its maximum capability and helping them troubleshoot any issues and helping them find the best solution. And so this is the territory for our San Antonio regional office because Esri is a global company. But since I'm out of the San Antonio regional office, we cover Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. And so my customer base is Texas state agencies and local government in Central Texas and East Texas and Louisiana as well. All right, so now I know we've got just a few minutes left here. So lastly, I just want to point out some real world applications of GIS. So I imagine that this dashboard may look quite familiar to you. This is actually the Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard that was put out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And so this dashboard is actually one of Esri's products that is found in ArcGIS Online. And so Johns Hopkins used Esri's dashboard software to be able to put this dashboard together to be able to provide and serve this information out to people all over the world. So I'd like to use this as an example when people ask me what I do for a living, because this is really relatable to a lot of people. Another example of how powerful GIS can be is you recall we had that Texas winter storm earlier this year, and here we're looking at a map of, this is a map in the bottom right of the city of Austin and all that snow cover that you see. And here on the left-hand side, you can see this frozen water. And this person's out here trying to break up some of that ice. There was a lot of damage from that storm as well, and then burst pipes. So one thing that was a big takeaway from this storm is knowing where your assets are. So understanding where all of your water pipes are, like from a city perspective or a utility perspective. And you'd be surprised. You know, we came across that there's a lot of folks out there who don't know exactly where all of their assets are. And during an event like this, it is extremely important that you know where your assets are, and especially if you have them mapped so that you can more accurately identify where to go to maybe shut off that water valve or understand where that water pipe is going from the meter into someone's household. And then also, you know, thinking about all of this debris that came from this storm, you can you can use GIS to go out and do field data collection for debris assessment, understanding where debris is, understanding where damages are, and being able to collect all of that data and information. And then there's also the other side of GIS is modeling storms. So not just modeling to understand how severe maybe that winter storm was going to be, but here in Texas, we're also really aware of hurricanes and hurricane season. And so we can use GIS to model hurricanes and those hurricane paths to better understand where they're going so that we can best prepare for that emergency event that may be coming, that the disaster that may come with that, and being able to keep as many people as safe as possible during those events. So not only being able to model these storms, but being able to map these storms, and then also the emergency management side of that. So again, you can keep your assets, you know, minimize the impact on your assets, but ultimately for public safety and keeping people safe. So those are some of the things that I work with my customers on, just to give you a quick highlight of that. And then lastly, I just want to point out that GIS addresses the world's challenges in general. We can use GIS when it comes to economic development. When we're talking about the future and having a sustainable future and conserving our resources, when it comes to pollution and energy and climate change and the environment, when it comes to making more efficient practices with agriculture, we can use it for business and maybe making your supply chains more efficient, managing our water resources better, and being better prepared for natural disasters and the urbanization and development that we're experiencing a lot in our own state. So I hope that that gives you a quick little idea of where I came from in my career and how it's evolved over time, and then all the different ways we can use GIS in the real world. So I want to thank all of you. I know this was a short, brief presentation, but if anybody has any questions, I would definitely entertain any questions. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to me. I've had many students, people I don't even know over the years that have reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked questions. So feel free to find me on LinkedIn and connect. But thank y'all so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. And then, oh, I think there was one other thing I do need to point out, and that is pointing y'all to the this last session here, or this review. So let me put that into the chat so you can review this session. If I can grab the link here. Nope, it's not letting me grab the link. But if you check out the TxGIS Day website and review this session, you can go and submit the survey there to let us know what you think. Thanks again.